right, today's second Saturday in March, and we're going to talk about a regional group of artists named the Florida Highwaymen. They have a very interesting story, and they made an interesting art production. So we're going to give you a little background they were landscape painters, and they've specialized in capturing the landscape of the East Coast, southern coast of Florida, right? They centered around the Fort Pierce area. But first we're going to talk about the hierarchy of art in terms of where landscape painting fits in. In the academies of Europe, Rome, and Milan, and Florence, and Paris, London, they basically evolved a structure to value art. Okay, the highest form of art would probably be called narrative art or history painting, which is basically painting that told a story that might be religious in nature, biblical scenes, biblical images, mythology that was Greco-Roman primarily in origin, and then allegorical, like Aesop's fables, that they would tell the story of a moral uplift. In fact, that was the basis for the hierarchy, is that historical paintings or narrative paintings would provide a moral lesson. Now, the second group in terms of the second class in the hierarchy would be portraiture, which basically was men, and primarily men, and sometimes women, whose pictures would be prominent citizen, government figures, religious leaders, people who had done things or made accomplishments, and they would be featured in portraits. Genre would be everyday scenes of people and activities, people picking cotton, people picking fields, and The Gleaners was a famous painting that everyday people doing everyday things would be genre paintings. Landscape fell to fourth on the list because it was not thought to have a moral underpinning. So it was just basically reflected like, this is the nature of geography, this is the nature of what we live in, it's basically natural scenery. Now in America, which we will talk about later, that somewhat changed, okay? And the fifth level is still life. That's basically group scenes of objects that manufactured or captured. So you got like dead birds, apple, fruit in bowls, all of that kind of stuff arranged in a table, in a tableau that, again, it was not necessarily having any kind of moral power. So that's the hierarchy of art, and landscape is like fourth on the list. Artist classification, one of the things that I try to get with this is who makes art? How do we classify artists? Well, the classification, this is like some of the common names: folk, outsider, art brute, mentally ill, intuitive, marginal, naive, visionary. And I made the last category up because I think it fits more appropriately. I do not like some of the, typically when in the South and you had black people producing art, it's always called folk art. And folk art for me is very specifically, it's more craft and decorative arts. In other words, you have everyday objects that you would use, that you would come across, and you would put a picture on it, okay? Like you had a lunchbox and you drew on your lunchbox, or you had some type of shoe, then you decorated your shoes, you made a quilt. Those are the things that arts and craft would be folk art, And the reason why folk art usually drew on the traditions of the community, that this is like the materials would be representative of a community like, again, the Sea Islands of Georgia with their reed baskets. That would be a folk art production. So that's why I look at it like, again, one of the folk artists, the reason that I grew up was a guy by the name of, no relation, David Butler, and he made decorated bicycles. He got a bicycle and he put streamers and painted scenes on it and all of that. Outside, and so folk art is like rooted in the tradition of the community. The people are generally untrained, and they, would like spice up the tools that they would work with, and they wanted an image on their the tools or objects that they encountered in their everyday life that were ordinary. Okay, outside of art, art by self-taught people who had little or no contact with what we call an art establishment. They did not get academic training. They were not associated with other artists. They are particularly just a law unto themselves. They made art as the spirit was revealed to them. So a lot of these categories overlap because intuitive art is a category where it's like prophetic and revealed, and like they had a vision, God talked to them, and they made art, decided their precept. Art brut is just basically, again, outside the ordinary boundaries of culture, and again, a lot of that, prisoners make art like that sometimes. They get materials and they markers and pens and manila folders that they would rip up, and then they draw on it, again, based on their own vision. Mentally ill people have kind of got, again, they receive visions, and again, Sister Sarah told me to do that, and she was my friend, that she would visit me, and she gave me the vision, and I put it on paper. Sister Gertrude Morgan was one of those artists. She wasn't mentally ill, but she was one that would be spiritual in nature. Landscape art. What's landscape art? Well, I have it broken down. The definition is basically depiction of natural scenery such as mountains, valleys, trees, rivers, forests, especially when the main subject is a wide view, so it's horizontally oriented as opposed to vertically oriented, and it's the subjects are arranged in a coherent composition. It usually is epic in scope. Okay, this is the bigness of the art, the spectacle of art as monumental. Okay, that's what it presumes. Now, the elements are the geographical features that I've mentioned, the river, stream, sky, all of that kind of stuff. And the people who are trained in that, as opposed to folk artists, if you notice, a lot of folk art is everything's flat. Okay, that's what for instance, like the biggest quote unquote folk artist in this area of Florida, because I'm trying to focus on Florida today, Purvis Young. Purvis Young, everything is in the same space. There's not stuff close, not stuff far. Everything is flat. The horses, not like running into a field. All of his horses are lined up, okay? Special landscape features, Luminism and Hudson River School. Hudson River School I'm gonna take first, which is basically the area in upstate New York or New England that has their particular landscape features. They would do features of the Hudson River Valley, and luminism is like another category where the properties of light really are emphasized in the images. So, okay, this is what I'm showing you several African Americans who did landscape paintings prior to the Florida Highwaymen. So again, part of it is people say, well, why they didn't do black stuff? Because black stuff wouldn't sell. Okay, they made a living, and they thought about how can we make a living, and we're painters and we like to paint, but we also, they painted what they liked, but on the other hand, even if they liked something that had more black content in it, the market for that is not. Grafton Taylor Brown was the first American to paint. He specialized in the geography of the Northwest in California, the Pacific Northwest in California. He was apprenticed to a printer, and then he learned the art of printmaking, and then he took up painting and map making, and he had a business in California and did quite well. So this is an example of his work. And there's an auction next week that he's gonna sell with it, but it's priced out of my range. But this is one that, again, horizontal orientation, big mountains, big water, again, majestic, that really focusing on the monumental nature of things and basically unspoiled. Now we're going to see one or two pictures that have people in it, but mostly the landscapes would only, people and structures and stuff was not the focus of the landscape. And again, if you saw them in the landscape, it was almost to diminutive status, because it was like, okay, yeah, you here, but ain't much to you compared to the landscape. Robert Scott Duncanson was a painter basically in the Hudson River School tradition, and he was one of the first African American painters that achieved international recognition. He apprenticed for carpenter. His brothers and father were house painters, and he developed his painting skills in his apprenticeship with painting. So he was a practical painter in terms of a house painter, but he also developed aesthetic skills by painting scenery and stuff. Again, he received no art training, but his artistic talent was recognized when he was very young, I mean, in like school age, and he won art awards in Ohio, but again, he did not, he was eligible if he were white to attend the Cincinnati Academy, but he wasn't allowed to attend. And it's one of the stories was that several of his portraits were receiving awards, and he couldn't attend, and his mother couldn't attend because they were black. So that was the thing. But he was able to make a living doing photographs and painting pictures and selling them. But he was a victim of the color line as well. Now, his most famous painting, I'm not going to show you, but this is one, Blue Hole, Floodwaters, Little Miami River. Okay, and you see that compared to the forest and the water, you can see like two little people in the middle of the foreground, which is basically dwarfed by nature. Okay, now one of his more famous pictures was Little Eva and Uncle Tom. That was the characters in Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yeah. Okay, and took place in Louisiana on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. And Little Eva, who basically, Pontchartrain is a body of water that is almost as big in that picture as the little floodwaters and Blue Hole is in this. and Uncle Tom and Little Eva are conversing, and they are small elements in the picture. So this is typical of landscape painting, big, monumental, accurate depiction of the scenery, and again, there were bigger issues than human beings. Ed Bannister was a leader in the African American community. He was active in Rhode Island and Boston, and he was, again, a believer firmly about the humblest aspect of the natural world are superior to human activity compared to the natural world. Belief that God could be found in those details. In other words, the scenery and natural settings reveal the hand of God. So he won the first prize in the Philadelphia's Centennial Exposition in 1876, and that was unheard of for an African American artist. That was his painting. That was not the painting that won, but this is one of his more famous pieces, Sunset Scene. And again, how they treated the lights, how they treated the clouds, how did they treat it? It's again horizontal axis, perspective, scaling, things in the background. You're kind of not sure what it was. Is it a building? Is it quote unquote like a telephone pole or something? You don't see it. And then the other things in the foreground. So again, it follows the rules of proper perspective and scaling about diffuse details, smaller going back, and the colors are more muted, or when you go to the background. This is one of my favorite painters, Henry Tanner. Henry, again, was a prominent son of an AME, one of the first AME bishops, Benjamin Tucker Tanner, that he was in the Philadelphia area. He studied, this is one of the first African American artists that did have formal art training. He attended the Philadelphia Academy, and his mentor, teacher, role model was Thomas Eakin, a famous white painter who was, of renown separately. But he did not, quote unquote, officially go to the academy, and everybody was not welcoming of him when he was there. But Eakins didn't tolerate that, and he's like, I want to teach him. He has talent. That's what I want to do. So he was accepted by Eakins, and then Eakin made it possible for the other people to accept him. He did a lot of religious things, and he did one of the first black artists that had black content. This is the painting that I included to show you guys, again, landscape, horizontal, light. Now, this is a little reversal of the light, because you see this is at sunset and the lighting is from behind. The lighting in the background is more prominent than the lighting in the foreground. And in fact, the foreground, it's shadowy, and the background, it's lighter. So this is a way of him treating light, and again, to the time of day, the sun is setting, and they are basically, reversing the perspective a little bit. But the reason why specifically I included, this is the first African American artist included in the permanent White House collection, Sand Dunes at Sunset. And in fact, to get this pink and beige color, he actually worked sand into the paint that to produce this. So again, it's a little subtle difference. The light is brighter in the back, and it's it's kind of like reverse diffusion, because the sun is in the back and the sun is setting, the light in the back is more than the light in the front. So typically the light when you go into the back is brighter in the front. This is the exact reverse of that. All right, this is one of my favorite artists, Norma Morgan. She was featured in a book by Elton Fact, 17 Black Artists, and she was a renowned painter, printmaker, etcher, engraver. She was a seamstress, and she died in 2016. She was and her mother was 90 years old and such as that, so she lived with her mother. She was an avid outdoorsman, and she focused on landscapes of the American West, like Grand Canyon type stuff, and we're gonna talk more about that next month. Her landscaping piece of the American West, because I have a few landscapes by her, but she really focused on Scottish Highlands, England, rock formation, like stuff like Stonehenge and such as that. But she did primarily her work in prints were black and white, but she could get such fine details and handle the light differences and the textural difference with such skill. Not being in color was not, I don't think, is a burden to her. So, but you'll see, this is, again, Catskill winter. This is a New England piece that she did to get the lighting of the winter scenes and the little details, and again the structure of the barn. It's like, you know, earth abides. So this barn structure is like dilapidated, kind of falling down. It's dwarfed by the mountains and the scenery and the sky for the background. But that tonality and the details of the foreground, I think is paramount. I mean, I have a number of Morgan prints that to me is exquisite. I mean, the Scottish Highland print she did, Granite Tor, which is basically means rock. Tor is a rock, and she did that single rock so beautifully that I was just mesmerized by it, and all of the stuff that let me put it this way, everything that I saw by her that came into me, I bought. That's how I was excited by her. All right, now we're gonna wrap up by talking about the Highwaymen. The social environment was the Jim Crow South. They started in the 50s. What does that mean? South was segregated. The black people in the South were agricultural workers. They were paid low wages. They had minimal opportunities to do other tasks. They were determined by, you know, like, what can we do to make a living? And they were determined to do something else other than agriculture, because basically they wanted a future, and the future that the South offered them at that time was a future that would be described as planting, picking, and packing. They plant a crop, they would pick the crop, and then they would pack up what they picked and ship it out. What else could a black man do? Okay, well, now we're gonna get into the entrepreneurship and art. Okay, this guy is A.E. Backus, Bean Backus, Alfred Ernest, and his family moved to Florida early on because they wanted to get in the pineapple business. Okay, that didn't work out so good, so they were house painters, and but he had an artistic talent, and he developed his art talent. He had little formal training. In fact, he was only tutored by a woman named Nancy Miller when he was in high school, and he went up to New York to the Parsons School of Design in high school what he would be in college age. He read about art and looked and observed. He was a keen observer of art, but he didn't even finish high school and did not go to college, okay? He had a recognition in the community. He painted Florida landscapes, and he would paint maybe like one painting a week or so, but he was represented in galleries, and he was represented in the community, and he painted on canvas. Now, unlike a lot of the social situations in the South, he was open-minded, friendly, and he was a very social person, and he was also non-discriminatory. Blacks were welcome in his place and treated just like everybody else, and that's his contribution primarily to the artists. Now, let me go another thing. This is Bean Bacchus. So this is typical Florida, and again, you see how the light hits on that meadow or the field in there about that orange light. I mean, that to me is beautiful. The details on the leaves and all of that, and this is again an interaction between the light, the trees, the species, all of that can paint a good picture. Okay, now Harold Newton was one of the first people that was an African American. He had artistic talent. Again, sometimes people say like, oh yeah, when the story gets told, they don't really recognize that these people had talent. People recognized that their talent when they were children and encouraged them, but it was basically encouragement along the lines of a hobby, as opposed to like, that's nice, but then you're gonna have to go back work in the field, okay? It's a good thing you can do this, but you can't make a living off of it, okay? And that's Harold Newton's. He met Bacchus, and he was in Bacchus' circle of friends, and they knew each other. And again, people say like, oh, Bacchus taught him. No, Bacchus did not teach him. He went over to Bacchus, a recommendation from people like, well, you paint like stuff like Bacchus, you need to go over there and see him. And he observed, and he kind of copied it, but he developed his unique style. He was not a clone of Bacchus, okay? But he learned the techniques using the palette knife, using oils, and then he made his own paintings. And then we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail about how he went about going about his work. This is a Harold Newton, okay? So this is gorgeous. You see the birds, you see the palm trees, you see the water, you see the reflection of the sky in the water. He is credited to be one of the the best artists of the group, okay, Harold Newton. And he was one of the first artists, and he was the one that had contact with Bacchus. This is a guy who was like an artistic phenomenon, Alfred Hare. And Alfred was charismatic, ambitious, the leader, entrepreneurial, all of the things that he was coming from a distinguished family. He was uncle and grandparents. One of his uncle was a naval officer. His Uncle James graduated from Bethune-Cookman. He had a BA from Xavier. He had a uncle that was his sister's husband was lynched and all of that. So he had a hard life. He had an art teacher, Zenobia Jefferson. Besides teaching him, she introduced him to Bacchus. Okay, now let me tell you how this thing played out. Okay, again, he was a student formerly with Bacchus. Bacchus taught him about technique and all of the stuff. But now he was two things. He was a young man in a hurry, okay? And he felt like the biggest thing that I think that I would attribute to Bacchus, his influence, he had a modest influence, I think, on their drawing and the painting, okay? But he had the biggest influence on them. We could make a living doing art. He makes a living doing art, well, we can do that. We can make a living doing art. However, we can't make a living doing art the way Bacchus did it, okay? When I'm gonna show you about we're gonna skip 2 slides and then we're gonna come back to, this is an Alfred Hare, okay? He's got a beach and the foam cap waves, and you got what I think is a pending storm or rainstorm in progress over there, and the windswept beaches, and you can almost feel the wind blowing in this picture because of the way that the trees are moving, okay? This is what I'm saying. Okay, they realized that they could make a living with art, but Bacchus had things available to him that Alfred Hare and the Highwaymen didn't have. He was represented by galleries, and people would commission him to do works, okay? They would pay him like, okay, I want you to make me a picture of like blah, blah, blah landscape, and I'm gonna pay you like $300, okay? He would work on individual pieces at a time, and it would took maybe 1 a week. So he was not rushed or hurried or whatever, okay? Moderate pricing, $200 to $500 for a commission or painting sold. And he worked, you know, even though people would hang out and he played music and, you know, drink while he's painting, he did it primarily by himself. I mean, this was not a group effort. Alfred Hare, they marketed their stuff direct to the consumer and door to door, okay? They went to like lawyers' offices, doctors' offices, you know, they would go on the road, they would load up stuff in the car, and almost the paint is wet still, and they loading up trying to get them, okay? Mass production, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit more. Assembly line, they had a division of labor. In other words, they had a sales force, people that sold the art, people that sold and painted. Sometimes people would paint it. Sometimes he would work on 20 things at a time. They would, like some people like, okay, well, yeah, you can't do the rest, but you can paint the sky. So paint the background for the sky, and then I'm gonna finish it up, okay? So what I'm saying is, they were economical. They would sell their paintings like $20 to $50 a piece, not $200 or $300. So it put them, they had an expanded market for what they were selling it for, and they basically like sold it cheap, okay? And they would sometimes, 3 or 4 of them would get together and paint as a communal experience at one time, as opposed to a solitary like artist, like, you know, we think about them with French, you know, berets and stuff and cigarette smoke, you know, no. They would like having a little party, and they would do art at the little art parties, okay? Now, factory process and division of labors. The artists, some artists made their own frame, and sometimes they get people to make the frames. And then one of the artists that we'll talk about later, Al Black, the one that I have here, he was the salesman. He would load up this stuff in the trunk, and he was like a master salesman. He had the gift of gab, and he could sell, you know, sand in the Sahara. He was that good, okay? They used cheaper materials than Bacchus, because they made Upson board, which is like a kind of like sheetrock, and they used crown molding for the framing, okay, because they could get that easily. And Upson boards were big, and they would cut it down to an appropriate size. They pursued direct sales. They had dedicated sales force, because they had people to like, okay, you take the art and sell it. They had pricing structures that were good, and volume and speed was paramount. It was estimated over the course of the first 20 years, depending on who you read, it's low estimate. It was like they produced like 20 to 50,000 paintings, as opposed to the high estimates like 150 to 200,000. Quality was, they wanted to do acceptable quality, but that wasn't the point. The money was the point. They wanted to have money as a motivator, and they have Al Black, I think, was attributed, a painting wasn't finished until it was sold. Okay, so if you don't sell a painting, okay, well, guess what? Your job is not done. We got to get the money. And then, even though they would sell art, they sold their art, they could make in one day what the people who were working in agriculture would make in a week. Okay, so they had a good life. They were able to afford a ministry. They bought, like everybody had, you know, not everybody, but they had good cars, Cadillacs. I mean, in over 50s and the 60s, Cadillac is a great car. I mean, it has lost some prestige now, but over there was none higher in terms of you black and you got a car, you got a Cadillac, that's, okay, enough said, okay? And Alfred was one that, again, he's got the elements of a blues story. At the age of 29, at a juke joint, he had gotten in a dispute with a guy over some woman, and he was married at the time. The guy's wife, you know, the details, like in all of these blues stories, were not necessarily clear, but at 29, he died. Now, he was the one that was responsible for the economic success in terms of getting the sales and everything that he first was working on, the direct sales and the going on the road and all of that. He did that in the assembly line production, and then emphasizing quick paintings and all of that, because supposedly he could do like between 10 and 20 paintings a day. Okay, so he was there with that. So when he died in 70, you know, it was a very setback for the guys. And this is the geography. They went from Miami to like Daytona Beach and all of that. That's the kind of range, and they would venture inland like Ocala and Sanford, Florida, and all of those kind of places. But that's where they were thinking about. And I'm gonna tell you how they got the name of the Highwaymen. Now that's Al Black, and he was a scam artist, and he would basically, you know, he was always doing stuff that you get in trouble for. He would pose as another painter of the group and promise the people that they're gonna have artwork, and then he would never deliver it. But he could sell. He learned how to paint indirectly because the art was so fresh in the trunk, it would get a little bit dinged up, and he learned to mix the paint and like patch the mistakes, and eventually he learned to do the paintings himself. When he would find favorable clients, if he was supposed to sell the painting for $20, the artist said, well, look, you sell my painting for $20. He may, if he felt like it, or he felt like this was a good mark, he would sell it for $50 and then pocket the difference, okay? So he was a con artist, okay? In fact, and this is a miserable thing. I mean, you got a middle-aged man, and he was in his, in the 1990s, he was hooked on crack and went to jail for 12 years, and he had also had to pay, he gotten in trouble with a white widow woman and bilked her out of some money, and he had the judge ordered him to pay $800. See, this is the sums of money that they were dealing with. He ordered to pay $800,000 in restitution, okay? He stayed in jail for 12 years. He painted in jail. He painted murals in the penitentiary. The wardens and stuff liked him, and they gave him the paint and supplies. But again, this is where the things changed. Oil, they did not let him paint with oil, because if you paint with oil, there's a thing that you can do to get high with oil. So he had to switch to acrylic. And because you were in a prison environment, you could not use palette knives, to things that could be fashioned to a weapon. So he had a plastic spatula that he would paint with over there. And he said he felt like jail saved him. And he came out clean and sober and doing that. And the warden liked him because the murals that he painted they felt like it was calming to the population. This is a list of the ones, they have like a lot of people that claim that they are highwaymen, but this is the official list. 26 people, they were inducted into the Florida Art Hall of Fame. So that's the official list. And again, it's not necessarily, there was one woman, Mary Ann Carroll. She is in the first column, about 5 people down. Ellis Buckner, Robert Butler, Mary Ann Carroll, and she did good work. She's like Poinciana trees is her trademark, and I'm gonna have to get one of her because it's purple. And then these are the pictures that we have here that you can kind of see. That's one by Al Black, it was untitled. This is one by Johnny Daniels, Morning Backwater. This is Backwater Scene by Al Black. This is Lagoon Scene at Sunset by Al Black.
His paintings is almost what we call high contrast. And you could almost say what people call black canvas.
Yeah.
It was really, colors really popping out.
Well, no, but that's what they were famous for. This is a story of people who were basically making a way out of no way. They did not want to play the hand that they were dealt, that they were going to survive in the world. It reminds me of the commercial, like the woman who's mad with her friend. I want good things. Well, they wanted good things. They wanted to have a better life, and they found a way to have that better life and to live a good life under very constraining conditions of Jim Crow South, okay? So this is the story of art meeting entrepreneurship and how people use their imagination and creativity to literally, like I was saying, make a way out of no way. All right, any questions? Or did I?